Hi, I'm your local internet friend, aka Toki, and for this video, I'm going to be talking about my personal experience with neurodivergent burnout. Now, the reason as to why I decided to talk about this is because there's a lot to talk about, but I've also just became aware of exactly where within the recovery process that I am. However, before we get into that, I do need to explain neurodivergent burnout. Why is it different from regular burnout? And like the general process from my understanding as to how one recovers from neurodivergent burnout, because it is different. Also, similar to a previous video, I will be saying the word burnout a lot in this video, to a point where it's almost going to sound like it is no longer a word. The main two differences between typical or regular burnout and neurodivergent burnout is that regular burnout is similar to an overheated system that just needs a moment to cool down, and perhaps for you to reorganize the way that you handle the system. Sometimes that means updating the system so it's not working overtime. Other times it's like maybe getting a new system entirely that better fits how much you're using it, and how long you're using it for. While neurodivergent burnout is more like a pipe bursting to it being under so much pressure. What I typed up is more like a pipe bursting due to prolonged pressure. And the second main difference is how you recover from it. As I said earlier, regular burnout is more like an overheated system that doesn't just need rest, but maybe needs an update. Neurodivergent burnout is similar to a pipe that's under a lot of pressure, and instead of just allowing it to rest, it needs an entire restructuring of the system so that it doesn't get under that amount of pressure next time. To put it simply, regular burnout requires reorganization with recovery and rest, while neurodivergent burnout requires a complete restructuring alongside recovery and rest, with the addition of maintaining self-care and your general life. Now, my personal experience, at least as to how it started, actually comes from the fact that I didn't know I was neurodivergent to begin with, and I had all of these expectations as to what I was supposed to be doing and when I was supposed to be doing those things, as far as the trajectory of my life. The expectation that I originally had for my life was not quite how it turned out. And I kept on shaming myself for the fact that I didn't get to that point, even if I understand why I didn't get to that point. I, like many people, dealt with neurodivergent burnout due to believing I was not neurodivergent, or that it was something that was inherently wrong with me. I was raised under pressure, so I originally just thought it was something I had to push through. To add on to it, my mother only encouraged it. My mother only encouraged my independence that turned into hyper-independence. because it meant less stress for her overall. And side note number one, generalization, not knowing the mental disorder or type of neurodivergence you are, in and of itself, can be more harmful, not just because it pushes you to believe you have to do way more until you get to that point, but also because it invalidates a lot of the struggles and obstacles that would essentially be in your way. Some of these things that you won't actually be aware of until you start hearing more about how the symptoms of being certain types of neurodivergent tends to show up within people, within a certain type of person. This type of ignorance is generally dangerous and harmful to the individual that is neurodivergent. And side note two, this is kind of going to swing back into the video topic, but I find talking about my upbringing and how it affected me to be a bit of an issue, a conflicting issue for me. While I understand the reasons as to why my mother made the choices she did, or at least the plethora of reasons that I could come up with on my own, and want to believe that she meant and still means well, I also have a bit of an issue. I also don't want to simply dismiss the effect that those choices and those actions had on me, simply because a lot of those choices and actions led to me having to deal with neurodivergent burnout in the first place. Again, she didn't know, which means I didn't know, which for my brain means that I would just be pushing myself until I just felt like I couldn't do it anymore. And then I would be shaming and blaming myself for not doing more, as if I wasn't about to have other people do the exact same thing. I wasn't aware, and neither was my mom, and that lack of awareness is what blinded me from some of the needs and challenges I was neglecting and experiencing respectively. And just because you kind of don't know that they exist, it doesn't make them go away, and it doesn't make them not exist. They only build up and pressurize the longer they are neglected. There are other ways in which a person can reach neurodivergent burnout, even if they have an official diagnosis of what their mental disorder / neurodivergence is. That's mainly not having an understanding of how that diagnosis can help them with creating a better system / structure for themselves. And most of the time, the neurodivergent burnout starts when you start actually accommodating those symptoms, those smaller issues within being neurodivergent, or within having, honestly, any type of disability diagnosis. One of the things that have been helping me with being a bit more compassionate towards myself within navigating burnout as a neurodivergent person is hearing the experiences of people that suffer from chronic illnesses, mainly POTS, and how they have been having to deal with the mental load of also giving themselves compassion, because chronic illness in and of itself is something a person has to manage, and managing any type of illness means you have to do things most of the time slower, but in general a different way than most people. And from my experience, here is what I both intentionally slash actively and unintentionally did to work on recovery from neurodivergent burnout. 1. Only handle the bare minimum, and also learn self-compassion. That second part is kind of what I would tell myself back then when I started, but yeah, doing the bare minimum. So, like, the things that you are obligated to do. That does mean taking care of yourself, but that also means allowing yourself to do, again, the bare minimum, but also grieving the expectations that you had of who you thought you were and what you thought you would be able to do. Because if you continue to have those expectations, that's a fly. If you continue to have those expectations, then you're only going to get frustrated that you're not able to reach those expectations. Especially if your brain works the way that mine does. I wish someone would have told me that one sooner. Number 2, learning different ways of how to release the pressure. What I specifically typed up was learn different ways to relieve stress and depressurize. But I was trying to find a way to learn a way to handle the pressure that has already built, releasing that slowly, and learning how to handle getting rid of whatever pressure builds up over the course of you essentially getting back to some sort of baseline normal for you. Now, I'm not saying to stress yourself out by finding healthy coping mechanisms and keeping to those healthy coping mechanisms. They don't all have to be healthy, because this moment will only be temporary. But at the very least, they should not be making your life generally worse than it was when you started recovery. 3. One of the things that I will always say is educating yourself on whatever illness, ailment, disorder, or neurodivergence that you are having to deal with, as well as very specifically pinpointing the symptoms themselves and figuring out what works with handling those. Like me personally, I have a tendency to forget things, mainly numbers. So I have an entire page of what I classify as very important information for me to at some point memorize, but at least have on hand in case I haven't done so yet. But also doing things like meditating, journaling out your thoughts and your feelings, One thing that I have recently learned actually helps me personally is playing video games, and very specifically challenging video games. It gives me a good form of something that is irritating, but it's not serious. And it helps to remind me this does not need for me to rage out. I need to take a break before I get to that point. The general goal, as I um, mentioned earlier, is to set up a self-sufficient baseline. The controlled variable, if you will. Earlier within the outline, I specified that neurodivergent burnout is similar to the tower card in a Rider-Waite tarot deck, where it's basically everything is crumbling because the foundation itself was shaky at best. And you now have to wait for the dust to settle in order to be able to start working on a stronger and more stable foundation. And that is essentially the goal. The self-sufficient baseline is the strong and stable foundation that you can then build on when you get to that point. And now to finally express that that is the point that I have gotten to within my own neurodivergent burnout recovery process. That was a mouthful. Being able to build up from that foundation. While I'm not quite out of the woods yet, I arrived at the rebuilding phase of recovery. It is basically after making sure that the foundation is solid, you have a solid baseline that is consistent. You can start slowly adding more onto it, or slowly start rebuilding floors of the tower. And the amount of work it took me within the last, we'll say 3 to 5 years to get to this point was questionably and honestly excruciatingly exhausting. And yet there are still some things that I have yet to work on, like actually calming my nervous system down, but we will get to that point. And that is about all for this video. I said a lot within this video. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe. That was a very weird transition. For full transparency, I literally went from I just went from silence to YouTuber mode, especially at the end of a video. And I'm pretty sure it's going to end up fitting with when I go ahead. I'm pretty sure it's going to end up fitting the way that I'm thinking about editing this video too, but wow, that was a quick transition. I've been your local internet friend, aka Toki, and this is Toki saying Toki out.